The interesting finds we had in this study was something that caught our attention was the difference in grain hardness. Because even our samples, they had levels of protein, amino acid, and energy very similar. We had some difference in grain hardness, which is super important.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Poultry Nutrition Blackbelt Podcast, where we discuss the latest in poultry nutrition research and industry trends. My name is Sam Rochel. I'm a co-host of the show and associate professor of poultry nutrition at Auburn University, and joined today by Dr. Vivian Vieira, who has done her graduate training in Brazil before taking her current postdoc position in Canada. And we're going to talk more about ingredient quality, which is something important for all nutritionists across all types of poultry, particularly around corn and soybean meal. So look forward to hearing about your work on this, Vivian. So very good to join you today.
Hi, good morning, Samuel. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your public about something that is very important, specifically talking about animal nutrition, that is this nutrient variability of the main ingredients like corn and soybean meal.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned you did a lot of your graduate work in this area. So can you walk us through kind of the overall objectives of your research and what you were trying to accomplish with that?
Well, our main idea was trying to understand why an ingredient produced in a determined region was different from the same ingredient produced in another one. And we know that several reasons why the same ingredient like corn, wheat, soybean meal, they behave differently depending on where it's grown. So we noticed that the germplasm is one of the biggest reasons why those ingredients from different regions perform differently. It is because each area has its own genetic pool. So plant breeders, they create varieties specifically suited for each environment.
Yeah, it makes sense. And just to give a little bit more background, you're looking at this and are you able to control for, I know there's a lot of confounding factors that we can't control for, but at least, kind of quantify rainfall and harvest time and those types of things to be able to come to that conclusion?
Well, we know that every region depends from the genetic lines that are specific to its local conditions. So these genes, they gradually form characteristics like corn kernel texture in case of corn. So in the first part of my PhD research, we studied 2 corn batches produced in different countries. And our goal was to describe these ingredients. So we hypothesized that they probably had different nutritional values, even though this difference wasn't always clear in the usual approximate analysis. So in the case of corn, it is important to look beyond the usual parameters like protein, starch content, and energy. So it's also useful to understand intrinsic characters of this kernel, because these traits can directly affect how the nutrients will be used and even the efficiency of enzymes added to the diet.
Yeah. So, what are some of if you look across this, what are some of the biggest surprises on different traits you think that you found impactful for the animal?
Well, the interesting finds we had in this study was something that caught our attention was the difference in grain hardness. Because even our samples, they had levels of protein, amino acid, and energy very similar. We had some difference in grain hardness, which is super important.
Yeah, and for people who may not be familiar with this, how did you evaluate the grain hardness?
Well, we performed a breakage force test using specific machines to evaluate this hardness. And in addition to this analysis, we also conduct microscope images to investigate more visually manner, how could we explain this grain hardness difference between two samples? Because we know that the degree of grain hardness is directly related to the zinc content on the endosperm. The zinc is a protein, is the main starch protein contained in the endosperm, and can appear more or less densely surrounding the starch granules.
Yeah. So, and then even before we get to the actual nutrient utilization and how grain hardness impacts that, how about just grinding characteristics? Do you see big differences in how that impacts particle size, uniformity, maybe at different grind sizes? How does that come into play?
Well, we didn't investigate those parameters specifically, but we know that in particular grams, a more resistant endosperm can impact both the process, especially the milling stage.
Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. So then, I guess in general, if you can make a generalization, is higher grain hardness or lower typically more beneficial for animals as far as, say, the energy content of the corn?
I would say the softer kernel would be better in terms of nutrient utilization because the starch granules, they will be encapsulated for a less dense protein matrix, making it easier the access of digestive or exogenous amylase to this starch granules.
Very interesting. So beyond the hardness, anything else surprising on the corn from your work, or any additional things that we should think about as nutritionists that maybe we overlook a lot of times?
Well, in corn, I think those were the most interesting insights we had.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned some soybean meal work that you did as well. Can you describe that a bit?
Yeah, with the soybean meal was also part of this research, and we wanted to approach it in a way that generate more practical industry-focused insights. So we compared two batches of soybean meal, and just like corn, the goal was to go beyond the traditional analysis, and we wanted to understand how much of this variation comes not only from genetic or agronomic factors or the climate, but also from the thermal processing. It has a huge impact on protein quality.
Why Genetics turns podcast airtime into brand authority. We don't sell ads, we elevate voices. Curious how far your voice can go to become a reference in the industry and attract more leads? Scan the QR code and discover how we can turn your expertise into unmatched brand authority. Let's transform expertise into influence, starting now.
I know this is a very tricky area when we try to measure the thermal processing, and then what are the outcomes that are most sensitive and reflective. I mean, we have traditional indicators of soybean meal processing, and then we have newer approaches. People are always trying to look at how to do this more efficiently and accurately. What's your opinion, and what are some of your findings, say, on some of the measurements we can look at to really monitor soybean meal processing?
I think this topic is a challenge. So we try to explore and have a different perspective beyond the traditional analysis. And one interesting analysis we ran was a microscope images of soybean meal particles. And we found that the samples with lower protein solubility, meaning they were exposed to more severe heat treatment, they had more compacted structures compared to the soybean meal with higher solubility. And these, in addition, these compact particles, they also presented far less pores, which led us to hypothesize that digestive enzymes might be less effective on this type of soybean meal because they simply cannot access the protein easily.
Yeah, just simply a lower surface area and perhaps resistance to just solubilization in general, probably. Yeah. Very interesting. Is there, so on either of this work on corn or soybean meal, I mean, these are interesting tests, but when you're looking at the hardness and the way that you measured it, or looking at the soybean meal through the microscope and the physical characteristics, is there any way to translate this to higher throughput analysis that can be done in the feed mill? Or what are your thoughts on that, on good indicators for quick tests?
For quick tests, I think nowadays we have analytical tools that can provide us these results quickly. Like NAR is an excellent tool. And we know that nowadays we can perform, for example, reactive lysine and for soybean meal, which is a good analysis that gave us results related to one of the most important amino acids.
Absolutely. Well, very interesting. Obviously, corn and soybean meal is going to be the bulk of most poultry diets, at least in the Americas. So very important for nutritionists to understand these. And these are questions we've had for a while, but continue to learn more. So appreciate your work on that, Vivian.
I know we still face real challenges in standardization and decisions that need to be made in animal nutrition. But this precisely scenario that drove us to the evolution of control tools, or more the advance of NAR we can use to predictive models and quick analysis. This is the future of nutrition. It involves integrating all of these in a practical way, transforming this nutrient variability into useful information.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned it at the beginning of that statement, the standardization becomes the key, because a lot of people look at these things in different ways, and you certainly can't always compare one test for the other and expect to get the same, results and when you compare two sources or whatever. So that's a good point.
Absolutely, it is.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Vivian. I really appreciate your work on this and look forward to hearing more and seeing more of what you come up with. And thank you to all the listeners for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and follow us on your favorite platform so you can catch the next one. So thank you again for joining Poultry Nutrition Blackbelt Podcast.
Thank you so much.